Good morning. Over the last couple of weeks I've been on leave, and apart from watching sunrises and sunsets and experiencing the waves roll up on the beach and walking with Nico and Susan along the beaches, taking lots of photos, probably too many, I read a couple of novels and we looked again at some old DVDs. One of them was the series Bosch, based on Michael Connelly's books on the LAPD homicide detective Hieronymus Harry Bosch. And his motto was, everyone counts or nobody counts. And he brought the same passion and intentionality, I guess, of dignity and respect and energy and drive and time to every murder victim. Whether they were a drug addict, prostitute, homeless person, or the wealthiest, most powerful person in the city. He did a lot of good. But he was a hard person to live with. He clashed with people. He said the wrong things. He hurt people. You just cringe at the things that Harry says, even to his family. He's a mixture of good and bad, of darkness and light. And I saw that in a lot of the characters of stories that I read and watched. This mixture of good and bad, of ugliness and beauty, of wonder and despair, of dark and light. There was one story I read called Dr. Sleep. It's about a young man, Dan Torrance. And the story goes back, and Dan has been part of a family, mum and dad and himself. And his dad, like his grandfather, his great-grandfather before him, had these demons in their lives, demons of the mind, particular things that haunt them and lead them into bad practices in life, particularly alcohol. They can't just have one or two drinks to kind of still their minds and quieten the demons of the mind. When they have one, they have two, they have 10. And all sorts of things happen in their alcoholism. Bad things. And Dan lives with the demons of his life. He's loved his father loved him, but when he drank there was fear and anger and all sorts of things, and those experiences are there. As he grows, Dan himself has these nightmares and these demons, and he turns to drink, and it's not one or two but as many, and gets himself into trouble. And when his mum dies, he becomes a drifter, drifting from town to town. He'd be there for 3 or 6 months. He'd get a job usually in a nursing home or hospice or something like that, a janitor or caretaker. But he was really good with people who were sick or elderly or dying. But then the demons would haunt him and things would remind him of the past, and he'd drink. And he'd do things that were ugly, that were bad, that were violent, things that brought shame on his life and his being, or caused him to break the law. And he'd lose his job, and that would be it. He would drift on by bus to another town. And this happened for a lot of years. And a lot of ugly things happened in his life. He drifted into one town, and there was this kind of fairground, a miniature town, and it had this miniature train that drove the kids and families around. And he stopped to admire the engine. It was the train set he never had as a kid, And Billy, the caretaker, sees him. They start up a conversation, and Billy says, "Oh, you like the train, do you?" Yeah. They're talking away. And Billy senses in Dan, there's a beautiful person, but there's a vulnerable person. That this is a person who needs help. And he gets it into his mind that he and his boss, Casey, could help this guy if he wants to be helped. He's not sure what the problem is, but he's got an idea. Anyway, he offers him a job and says, "Yeah, you won't work. I need someone to help me." It could only be for winter, because in the summer the students will come back and they'll claim their jobs again. And Dan says, "Yeah, but there's a hospice down the road. If it works out, I'll get a job there. That's where I've worked before, and I'm good at that." So he goes, and Billy takes him to the boss and Casey, and they talk. And Casey's got this sense of, yeah, okay, this is a guy who's a good guy, got good references, but there's something in there that needs help. He's only got 2 rules. You turn up and you do your work and you do it well. No alcohol. And that suits Dan fine because he knows that alcohol will get him into trouble. Anyway, it's good for a while. He's got a couple of people looking over him and working, and it's good. But then the demons come back. Things remind him of the past. Things happen, and the nightmares start, and the mind is going, and he can't still it. And he's not getting sleep, and everything's starting to unwind. And he goes to the bottle shop and buys a bottle. But before he drinks it, he fights, and he puts it in the bin and runs away. And he does this a couple of times, and he thinks he's going okay, and then it all gets worse and worse. One morning he goes to the bottle shop and buys more grog, and he's sitting in the park near work, twisting the lid on and off, willing himself not to, but desperately wanting to. Willing himself not to, desperately wanting to, and Billy comes up early. And he says, "You got a problem, mate, haven't we? What's going on? You don't really want to drink that, do you?" And he says, "I do. I desperately want to drink it." And they to and fro, and he says, "Dan, let's go and see Casey. I think you need help." And Dan's wanting to fight it, but there's something in him wants what Billy's offering. So they go and see Casey, and Casey takes the bottle off him and says, "You don't want it, do you?" And he says, "Yes, I do." And they had this conversation. And Casey says, he's a veteran of AA. He's an alcoholic who's been dry for a long time, and he knows his stuff. And he says, "Dan, you've got a problem. I can see it, Billy can see it. I'm sure it's there in your past. You've got a problem. Are you willing to admit you've got the problem?" And Dan fights it, but eventually says, "Yeah, I do. And he tells some of the story. And Casey asks him, "So can you fix this problem yourself?" It doesn't seem to be, you've been drifting around. "I can't." He said, "Well, you've got to accept the higher power." And Dan's not sure about this God stuff, he doesn't know what to believe or what to think. But he's worked a lot with the dying, and he knows there's something more beyond this life. He talks to them about going to sleep. He's seen it in them. This is the journey into something else. And he knows there's something there and maybe someone with it, and if that's what God's about, so be it. Anyway, he gets into the program, 90 AA sessions in 90 days, and then he finds his rhythm in AA. And he gets dry and sober and stays that way. But as part of that process, Dan's got to recognise the demons in himself and own them. He's got to own his past, not deny it or push it aside or pretend it's not there or want it to go away. He's got to accept that he's an alcoholic with problems and he's done some bad stuff. And that's who he is. Alongside him being a good person, he's a great and loving and wonderful person who has done some of the most wonderful, loving actions in helping people to die well, of sitting with people who are sick and elderly and giving them time and energy, of being generous to people. There's these two parts of him. The life that is him, that he loves, and the shadow side that he wants to deny and hide from, that keeps coming back and comes back as shame and guilt and all those other things. Anyway, Dan's journey is one of reconciling these two parts of his life. To recognise that he's all of this. To embrace the darkness as well as the light. That he's not purely good or purely bad. He's both. And to bring that shadow stuff, that ugliness, that darkness into the light. And eventually he confesses before the AA these sins, these crimes, these ugliness, if you like, this evil that he's done. And they forgive him. And he makes restitution with those he can. And he's able to forgive himself. And recognise that in him there is this good and this evil. This ugliness and this beauty. This joy and wonder and despair. And I think this is what Jesus is talking about. He uses different words. In a story this week, he talks about weeds and wheat. A farmer sows his field with wheat. and his workers look after it. And as the wheat grows up, it's looking good. But when it gets to the point where it's starting to produce seeds and fruit, if you like, the workers realise there's weeds. Someone's sown weeds in this field. And they look very much like the wheat. It's tares or darnel that look very much like the wheat. And it's hard to distinguish them. They go to the master and they say, look, we sowed wheat in your field, but someone's come in the night and sown weeds, and now you've got a field that's a mixture of weed and wheat. Do you want us to pull the weeds out? And the master says, no, don't. You might mistake the wheat for the weeds. Wait till it's ready for harvest. Then you'll know. Pull the weeds out then, put them aside and let them dry out. Use them for fuel for the fire, along with the chaff and the stalks of the wheat. You see, darnel is airheads. When the wheat forms in the heads of the wheat, the ears, they're heavy. They hang down. But the darnel are airheads. There's nothing in them. And they float up. And you can easily pick the weeds from the wheat. And I think Jesus is saying that in human life, the fields of our lives are wheat and weeds. We're not purely wheat, good stuff, but we're not purely weeds. But too often we have this dualistic thinking where we think we're either good or bad. All good or all bad. And sometimes that shifts in moments, you know. Moments I'll think, I'm just useless. And other moments I'll think, I'm the best in the world. But Jesus is saying we're a complex mixture of light and dark, of weeds and wheat. Don't try and pluck the bad stuff out, or ignore it, or hide from it, or push it away, or avoid it. It's there. But it will be known by its fruit. And when we own it, when we see the goodness, when we see the wheat and the fruit and the seeds in that, we know that's the good stuff. Bring your weeds into the light of day, and then they can be exposed. We can own, like Dan, that we are good and bad, that we are capable of good and evil. And there are things we do which we regret. There are things we do which we're proud of. And it's all of us. But it's only as we're reconciled to who we are, reconciled to the fact that we are capable of both good and evil, that there's stuff in us that wants to be selfish and greedy, that wants to tell lies and protect, that is fearful and all of that, just as there is stuff that is beautiful, loving, kind, compassionate, sacrificial, generous. And that's what we've got to nurture and allow the other stuff to become into the light, to be revealed for what it is, and to strengthen the good stuff, feed the love and the joy and the hope. It's owning who we are and working on our shadow side, recognising the darkness within us and accepting it and exposing it to the light of grace, forgiveness, hope, peace. And that's the way of Jesus. Amen.